So what do we do in those? That's how I go about getting honey production. In terms of mite treatment, I will treat this unit just like I would this unit, or just like I would that unit. I'll put a Formic Pro is what I would typically use this time of year, so I'd put a Formic Pro pad on here, Formic Pro pad on here, put my honey supers back on. Obviously with double deeps, we put a Formic Pro in between the two brood chambers here, and on the single deeps I'll put the Formic Pro just on there. Where all the brood is concentrated at the bottom in this hive and this hive, as opposed to being mixed together, I think the mite treatments work particularly well. And so I find it to be very, very successful, and a great way to increase our honey production. Now let's also look at how I go about overwintering my hives. So typically, of course, we're going to take our honey, harvest our honey. So the honey's coming off. This hive had 30, 60, and then another 60 pounds here or so, maybe 70, 120 pounds off this hive. Queen excluder comes off, and then what's going to happen here is I will set it up with a bee cozy. But first thing, let's take it in order. This time of year, honey is just starting to come off, depending on the honey flow. I'll take the honey supers off where the honey flow is poor. They're coming off already, and if the honey flow is good, I'll keep the supers on, because I still want this area to be producing some brood. But we're just getting to that changeover time now where I want them to change over and really start filling this up with honey. Even my single deeps are starting to get some honey accumulating in the outside here, whereas during the summer there isn't a drop of honey on these boxes. So, for example, if I take this off at the beginning of September, and there's typically very little honey in here at the beginning of September. Now that we're at the 14th of September, they have been starting to put honey here. But going back to, let's say we took it off on the 1st of September, well, the first thing I would do is I would make sure that I would put on, say, an inner cover here, and I'd pop a bucket feeder on right away. You have to get that feeder on immediately, because you've literally only got a day or two supply of food left in here, and they would starve if you don't get the honey on, the sugar syrup on right away. Now, some people might say, well, the advantage of this over this is that this is going into the winter with this full of honey. That's true, but I'd prefer to be selling that honey rather than them filling it up with honey. I'd rather feed them sugar syrup. Sugar syrup, while it might not have the broad range of nutrients that honey has, they are bringing some nectar in here, and they are putting some honey in there, so some of those nutrients are going in there. But typically the brood have already been reared. The bees have already been reared for the winter time. They've already got that energy. It's the pollen that gives them most of the nutrients, not the honey. But sugar syrup makes for an excellent winter feed. Sugar syrup made from white granulated sugar is sucrose. Sucrose with a bit of water. When they digest sucrose syrup in the wintertime, they burn off all of the material in the sugar syrup. Whereas in some fall honeys in particular, there's a lot of ash content, a lot of undigestible material in that honey. Because the nutrients, some of them are great for the bees, and some of them are not as good for the bees, because the ash content means their guts fill up. That's the undigestible material. As they're eating honey for months during the winter, their guts are filling up. They have to defecate. So they need that break in the weather in order to get out and cleanse. Whereas with sugar syrup, they could go that whole winter without cleansing flights if they needed to. In Canada, for example, where they house their bees over winter indoors, the bees will go into those rooms in November, beginning of November, and not come out until the end of March, beginning of April. 5 months with no cleansing flights at all. And the insurance companies will insure those commercial beekeepers to that against losses of bees, as long as they've got a good track record of hive management for mites and that sort of thing. They will insure those bees against losses, provided that they've only been fed sucrose syrup to go into the winter on. If they've been allowed to fill up with honey instead of sucrose syrup, the insurance companies won't touch them because the mortality rates are actually higher. So whilst we dearly want to give our bees honey for the winter, think twice about it, because actually sugar syrup is a fantastic winter feed for the bees. They've got their nutrients in there already with the pollen and some of the honey they produce, but the bulking up with sugar syrup, that's a good thing. And sugar syrup might cost us 50 cents a pound to make, and the honey we sell at $10 a pound. So dollars and cents wise, it makes a heck of a lot of sense to take that 60 pounds of honey off the hive and feed them sugar syrup instead. Anyway, going back, let's get back to preparing for winter. So we feed them up, and we want these, in a case of a single brood chamber, we want this hive to be filled wall to wall with honey, and that will take, well, nearly wall to wall. There'll be a small amount of brood in the very center right up until about the 3rd week of October, by which time then there's no brood. That middle part may not fill up with honey, but that's enough. You've got about 80 pounds of honey in this. Whole package weighs about 100 pounds, but you'll have about 70, 80 pounds of honey in that box. In this hive, you'll have honey up here, maybe some sugar syrup because we're feeding them late or something, but you want this box filled wall to wall with honey, top to bottom. No gaps in between, and by default that usually means that this box is about half full. That's a good 100 to 120 pounds of honey with a bigger cluster, because the bees judge their cluster by the volume of space they have to overwinter. And so they've got a big cluster in here. This one's got a big cluster, it fills the box, but only as much as filling the box. So these bees are going to use that 120 pounds roughly. This is going to use roughly the 80 pounds. In the case of the 5-frame nukes, they might fill with 40 pounds of honey apiece. But I had bees coming through the winter with 5-frame nukes, and they hadn't even eaten all their honey. They had 1.5 frames of honey left in May. And I'll show you how I do that. But first I'll show you how I'd overwinter some of these typically. So let me get some of the equipment out over here. We are in the season for robbing, and robbing will become a real issue come about the first frost. Normally that's sometime in the last week of September, I'm sorry. And so typically I will reduce my entrances then, and all I do, I don't use one of those twisty entrances. I simply put a little block of wood in there, and when it comes time for a mouse guard on the hive, I don't usually put my mouse guard on yet because I'm going to go in here with oxalic acid vapor wands. But by the time we finish that, and let's say the last week of October, then I'm ready to put my mouse guards on. So I'll put my little grid in here, and another grid over here, and another piece of wood over there. Okay, so my entrance is reduced, my mouse guard is on, I've finished feeding, and typically at this point I do without my inner cover. And what I put on instead is a feeding rim. The feeding rim is roughly 1.5 to 2 inches of wood with a notch at the top. And I will typically put that notch upmost. This way I've got a space here that if I want to, or if I feel that the hive feels light when I check it in the winter time and I heft the hive, if I feel, oh, it's not as heavy as I thought, I didn't get as much sugar syrup as I thought, I might put some blocks of food in here, like blocks of sugar or better still, winter patties. I prefer winter patties over the blocks of sugar. I hate the candy boards. I've made candy boards with a screen bottom and things, and I always find the candy boards half eaten in the spring, and it's in the way, and I really dislike it. So although they can work pretty well, I've usually found candy boards to be more of a hindrance than a help. So I prefer to put something like winter patties in there if I needed to. But better still, feed them up right in the fall. You don't need to put anything in here. But I will still put this rim on regardless. Then, what I will normally do is put a moisture absorbing board on the top. It's called Homosote. And sometimes people use supers of straw or sawdust or that sort of thing. Those work pretty well. They have the same principle applies. They're there to absorb excess moisture which may condense inside the top of the hive and stop it raining back down on the bees. Then I will put an insulation board on the top. And then on top of here, on this, I will then put one of these. It's called a bee cozy. But before I do that, I'm going to put one screw down here to stop the cozy falling down. Where is it? Over here. What I'll do is just above this entrance, I'll take a long screw, preferably about 4 inches. So that will stop the cozy sliding down over this entrance. The bee cozy has a thin spot in the insulation here. There's a seam here. This goes to the front of the hive. Now the cozy doesn't go down here. Now what I will typically do is I'll take another screw and put it in this feeding rim here, just to stop it covering that hole. So now it's insulated, and I find a cover which I've buried under here, so I'll just take one off here, and I'll just put a cover over there. And now this hive is ready for winter. I will do exactly the same sort of thing on my double deeps here. But what the heck do I do about my nukes there? Let me show you. Let's take our honey supers off our double deep. We've gone through the process of making sure that this upper brood chamber was full of honey. I've already got a screw there, but I will put an entry reducer and a mouse guard on the bottom here. So I'll do the same thing here as we did in the other hive. So a reduced entrance. I like to have about an inch, a 2-inch entrance down here. So mouse guard's on, the bolt is in here. I would put now a bigger bee cozy on. Now, I take advantage of the fact that I've got this extra big cluster here. So in all my yards, I have double deeps, single deeps, and nukes in just about all of my yards here. Again, we've got the seam here, and that goes in front of the hive. The reason it goes in the front is there's a thin spot in the insulation which provides a channel where air can move from the bottom of the hive to the top entrance and vice versa. And by doing that, there's always a channel for the air to move. It's a lot easier if there isn't all this stuff in the way. Actually, in the field I can do it a lot faster than I can do it on this demonstration here. And again, what we'll do is we will put a rim up here, which I'll have to take one over here. I thought I had all this material out, but I missed a couple of ones here, so we'll put this feeding rim up here. Put a sheet of Homosote on top of it. Sheet of insulation. And again, I'll take another bolt and I'll put it here to hold it away from this upper entrance. So my typical two-story hive, I would just put a cover on it and that's ready for the winter. But we're going to do something different here. Instead of just putting that there, I'm going to take all this stuff off. I'm still going to keep this rim up here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my nukes up there. But first of all, I will take the board which I've buried over here. Just 1 second. These are things that I love. It's a double screen board and it's been made specially to go on the top of a hive here, and you can see it's got an entrance here. On the opposite side here, there's an entrance here and an entrance here, and it's slightly wider and it's wide enough for 2 nukes. So I'm going to turn it around this way. So now my nukes are taken over here. I'm going to take the bottom off them and put one 5-frame nuke over here and one 5-frame nuke over here. Actually, I put this the wrong way round. I wanted to show you the other way round. So just 1 second. Put this board this way around. Normally I would do it the other way around. I'll have the entrance of the hive on one side and the entrance of the nukes going that way. But because the camera's over here, I'm going to do it both of them facing the same direction. So the reason I do them in opposite directions is to stop accidental crossing over when the bees are using the upper entrance from down below. I don't want them accidentally going into the wrong hive. So I do it the other way around. But for demonstration purposes, we put it here. And now we've got our 2 nukes. And this double screen, let me show you another double screen. What happens with a double screen board? Screen on this side and a screen on this side of the piece of wood. That means it's a sandwich there with a piece of plywood in between. Bees cannot physically touch each other from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top. The transmission of pheromones in the bees is by touch, so they can't physically touch each other from one hive to the next. And this way there's no interference of pheromones and that sort of thing, but what does flow through the screen is warm air. And the warm air from this big cluster down here with 120 pounds of honey in there to keep it fueled up passes through and gently goes into these nukes. There's some ventilation here as well, but basically some of the heat from this hive goes into these 2 nukes. So now I just prepare the tops of those nukes for winter, and they get exactly the same as the other hives. Well, almost exactly the same. I don't put a Homosote board in there. I just actually use more insulation. So I will put a feeding rim and another feeding rim. Keep them separate. Now on these I'll probably preemptively put some extra blocks of candy in here. So I'll put a few winter patties in here probably in November when I set these things up, because if any hive is going to run short of food, it's going to be these guys here. But then I'll put a separate piece of insulation on top of both of them. I do it separate because I may want to open one hive and not the other. And then I'll actually put a second sheet of foam board up here to keep them warm. And then I'll simply put their nuke tops on as well. But before I do that, I am going to prepare these hives a little differently. So now, got an entrance here. So I want to make sure I'm going to put another cozy up here. See if I can do it without pushing it off. It's actually easier when these things are heavy. Right now these are empty. So it's easier to put a screw into a 50-pound box than it is to put one into a 1-pound box, a 5-pound box, because they move around. Okay, so now I can stop the cozy sliding over the entrance of the nukes. And I will put a cozy on them. And as long as these are nukes that don't have handles sticking out and that sort of thing, that's why this has a piece of wood here. I tore a handle, I broke a handle off here specifically so that I can put a bee cozy on it. You might have to take this foam board off because everything is a bit loose in here. This is where having a second person in the field with you really helps. So now we have the bottom hive insulated, the top hive insulated, 2 inches of foam at the top up here. I would put one more screw, I need one more screw. Probably actually could do with 2 screws here, but I didn't bring 2. So I'm going to put 2 here. One there. And we want another one here. And with these, so now these nukes are nice and warm. They're getting the benefit of these below. They've got an upper and lower entrance. This hive's got an upper and lower entrance. These 2 have upper and lower entrances. And they typically, and last year I overwintered 12 nukes this way and got 11 of them through. And the 2 that 2 of them came through with about 2 frames of brood, 2 frames of bees, 3 frames of bees. The other, what was it? The other 9 came through and they were full of bees. And I was ready to put them into deep boxes in April, in fact. So the nukes can come through extremely well that way. And again, just like all the other hives, the number one thing is make sure the mite levels are nice and low, and then make sure the food is good, and then make sure you look after them. So I hope that was relatively clear. I will attempt to answer questions if I can hear you. My hearing is pretty darn bad, and on the speakerphone on the computer can be a little hard. But I hope you found that interesting.
Well, very interesting, and I can honestly say that I've never seen it done that way before.
No,
I've
this
never
this
seen
is,
that.
to my knowledge, I'm the first person to do that. But it really worked very, very well last year, and I'm intending to do that with about 30 or 40 nukes this year.
Warm? Yes, that keeps them warm. Okay. Anyway,
Excellent. Well, I'm amazed, actually. Are there any questions?
ask them, is there any way we can get that board? Are they available? Who makes them, or where they make them?
I have a friend of mine makes them for me, and yeah, I try to keep them in stock here, and I plan to have them in stock through this season. And also, I use the same boards in reverse for when I'm taking queen cells from hives that want to swarm and making nukes. So, or you could just use it exactly the same way. You could put nukes with queen cells above, and all you need is a single frame of bees up here. You can do exactly the same thing, and you can make nukes out of single combs, even in Maine, by using the heat from below and put queen cells in there. I did it, in fact, this year I did it with 2 hives. I put 2 stacks of them, one on top of the other, and I made what I call a little tower of queen cells. But they have multiple uses. It's an adaptation of what's called the Snellgrove board. And I do a couple of different styles of ones. One's for 2 standard 10 frame boxes, one on top of the other. But this one's specially for 2 nukes on one side and a standard 10 frame box on the other. But what I found so amazing the first year I did it was just how much honey those nukes can produce. I've done nukes, just growing them into, making nukes late in June, putting them in 10 frame hives and getting a super of honey off them. I was amazed at that. But to do this, and I had 150 pounds off 2 nukes, and I did that 5 times last year. This year, the honey flow wasn't quite as good in the fall. We're not finished with it yet, but this year I would say I'm more like averaging about 100 pounds for 2 nukes, so more like 50 pounds per nuke instead of 75. But still, per bee, that's a heck of a lot of honey. Okay.
Wow. Any more questions? Lynn, did you have a question?
No, it's fascinating.
I think we're just overwhelmed.
Well, I'll be happy to answer questions if you think of it later. As I say, what I'll try to do is edit this a little bit and take out some of the ums and ahs and put it on my YouTube channel. And feel free to email me or Facebook message me or on the comments on the YouTube channel. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Peter, I have a question.
Sure.
What?
Did you put a moisture board on top of your nukes?
Actually, I did not. Last year I didn't cut any smaller moisture boards. What I actually did was I put a double insulation on the top. And actually that kind of has the same effect. Instead of it being cold enough to condense on the top because it's insulated, it seems that the moisture just went out the vent hole in there. But I think it probably wouldn't hurt to do the moisture board, but I found with the sample that I did last year, they did perfectly well without.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, when should you put the top beater on with the sugar serum?
As soon as they need it, basically. You have to take each case on its own merits, really. I would say that it's usually between the 1st of September and the 15th of September. But if I have a hive that, let's say I've got double deep brood chamber, and that upper brood chamber is full of honey already, more or less the bees have all the honey they need, I'll leave the honey supers on until frost, and then take it off, and I don't even have to feed this hive. Whereas when I'm taking honey supers off my single brood chambers and my nukes, now those are leaving them with very little honey in there, so I have to put that honey on immediately. And I've got to work out whether, if there's a honey flow, are they getting anything from nature, or do I have to put it all on myself? If I have to put it all on myself, I've got to leave at least 3 weeks to get it done. Even though I'm feeding as fast as I can, they will fill up pretty fast. I'd rather have 4 weeks to do it. So I'm right in the middle, just finishing off my Formic Pro treatments. So as soon as they come off this week, I'm putting sugar to just about every hive except for the ones that are already full. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. It was
Thank you.
a pleasure doing a presentation for you.
Off, leave it, put the top feeder on.
Thank you, Peter.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you so much.
Okay,
Thank you. That was really great.
thank you.
And I'm really glad that we have this on video.
Like everybody else, I lose 2 weeks. I got to make a decision
Right.
tomorrow.
You'll be able to see all the mistakes I made. Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, we'll be in touch.
Good
All
night.
right,
Good night, everyone.
good night.
Thanks for joining us.